We've all faced tough choices at work. But what happens when your boss's request crosses a line? This is what happened to me, and the unexpected domino effect it set in motion. You won't believe how a simple no can change everything. My name is Jessica Parker, and until 6 months ago, I was the senior marketing director at Pinnacle Innovations, a mid-sized tech company in downtown Seattle. At 32, I thought I had it all figured out. I had climbed the corporate ladder faster than most of my peers, earned a six-figure salary, and had a corner office with a view of the Space Needle. I should have been happy. I should have been grateful. Instead, I was about to learn that sometimes success comes with a price tag you never saw coming. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday. I arrived at the office at 7:30, my usual time, clutching my oversized coffee and mentally preparing for another day of managing campaigns for our latest software launch. The Pinnacle Innovations building was one of those sleek, modern structures that screamed disruption and innovation from every glass panel. Inside, the open concept workspace buzzed with the energy of ambitious 20 and 30-somethings who believed they were changing the world one app at a time. I had been with Pinnacle for 4 years, working my way up from a junior marketing coordinator to my current position. The company specialized in productivity software for small businesses. And while the work wasn't revolutionary, it paid well and offered the kind of career trajectory that made my MBA feel worthwhile. Our CEO, Marcus Hartwell, was a 45-year-old tech veteran who had previously sold 2 startups for substantial sums. He was known for his unconventional management style and what the company PR team diplomatically called creative problem-solving approaches. Marcus had a reputation for unusual requests. In my time at Pinnacle, I'd seen him ask the finance team to calculate the cost of replacing all office furniture with standing desks made from reclaimed wood, demand that the HR department implement a company-wide meditation program led by his personal guru, and once insisted that we rebrand our entire product line because he had a dream about dolphins. The running joke in the office was that Marcus operated on a different wavelength than the rest of us mere mortals. Most of his eccentric demands were harmless, if expensive. The standing desks never materialized. The meditation program lasted exactly 3 weeks. And the dolphin rebrand was quietly shelved after our legal team pointed out potential trademark issues. We had all learned to nod along with his ideas, implement what made sense, and find diplomatic ways to let the rest fade into obscurity. It was part of the job, part of working for a visionary who sometimes confused vision with hallucination. But that Tuesday morning, as I settled into my desk and began reviewing the quarterly marketing metrics, I had no idea that Marcus was about to make a request that would test every principle I thought I stood for. The email arrived at 9:47 a.m., marked with high importance and containing a single line. Jessica, my office, now. Urgent matter. I felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that accompanied any summons from Marcus. His urgent matters ranged from genuinely important business decisions to impromptu discussions about whether our company logo would look better in a different shade of blue. I grabbed my notebook and headed to the executive floor, my heels clicking against the polished concrete floors. Marcus's office was a testament to his success and his ego in equal measure. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, while the interior was decorated with expensive modern art and the kind of furniture that cost more than most people's cars. Behind his massive glass desk sat Marcus himself, his silver hair perfectly styled and his tailored suit impeccable as always. "Jessica, come in, close the door," he said without looking up from his laptop screen. I complied, taking a seat in one of the uncomfortable but undoubtedly designer chairs across from his desk. Marcus finally looked up, his pale blue eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made me shift uncomfortably. "I need you to do something for me," he began, his voice carrying the same tone he used for both mundane requests and company-changing announcements. "Something that requires your particular skill set and discretion." I opened my notebook, pen poised to take notes. "Of course, Marcus, what do you need?" He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in front of him. "I need you to seduce David Chen." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I blinked, certain I had misheard him. I'm sorry, what? David Chen, the CTO at Meridian Solutions. I need you to get close to him, gain his trust, and find out what their Q4 product launch strategy is. They're our biggest competitor for the small business market, and I have reason to believe they're planning something that could significantly impact our market share. I stared at him, my pen frozen above the paper. David Chen was indeed the Chief Technology Officer at Meridian Solutions, Pinnacle's primary competitor. He was also married with 2 young children, a fact that made Marcus's suggestion not just unethical, but potentially destructive to an innocent family. Marcus, I'm not sure I understand what you're asking me to do, I said carefully, though the sick feeling in my stomach suggested I understood perfectly. I'm asking you to use your assets, he said, his gaze dropping briefly to assess those assets before returning to my face. You're attractive, intelligent, and charming. David Chen is a man with access to information I need. I'm sure you can connect the dots. The room felt like it was spinning. In all my years of corporate experience, through all the questionable decisions and morally gray areas that came with business, no one had ever asked me to prostitute myself for company intelligence. The suggestion was so outrageous, so completely inappropriate, that I struggled to form a coherent response. Marcus, I can't do that. What you're suggesting is not only unethical, it's potentially illegal. Corporate espionage, sexual coercion, fraud. He held up a hand, cutting me off. Don't be dramatic, Jessica. I'm not asking you to steal state secrets. I'm asking you to have a few drinks with a competitor, maybe dinner, and see what you can learn about their business strategy. It's called competitive intelligence, and it's a perfectly legitimate business practice. No, it's not, I said firmly. What you're describing is manipulation and potential blackmail. I won't do it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Marcus's expression hardened, and I saw a flash of something dangerous in his eyes. Excuse me? I said no. I won't seduce David Chen or anyone else for company information. It's wrong, and it's not part of my job description. Marcus stood up slowly, his 6-foot frame towering over me even from across the desk. Jessica, I think you're misunderstanding the nature of your employment here. You work for me, which means you do what I ask you to do. This isn't a democracy. And I think you're misunderstanding the nature of employment law, I shot back, my own voice rising. You can't ask me to engage in illegal activities as part of my job. What you're suggesting could constitute sexual harassment, not to mention the potential legal ramifications for corporate espionage. Marcus walked around his desk, moving closer to where I sat. I resisted the urge to shrink back into my chair. You're being very dramatic about what is essentially a networking opportunity. I'm not asking you to sleep with the man, just to be friendly. To use your natural charm to gather information. You specifically used the word seduce. Marcus, that's not networking, that's sexual manipulation. I think you're overreacting, he said, his tone becoming condescending. Perhaps you're not as committed to this company's success as I thought you were. The threat was clear, even if unspoken. I felt a surge of anger that overrode my fear. My commitment to this company has nothing to do with my willingness to compromise my ethics. I've delivered exceptional results for 4 years without having to seduce anyone. Marcus returned to his chair, his expression calculating. Jessica, I'm going to give you some time to think about this. I understand that my request may have caught you off guard, but I need you to consider the bigger picture. This company employs over 200 people. Their livelihoods depend on our success. Sometimes, that success requires us to make difficult choices. Difficult choices, yes. Illegal and unethical choices, no. I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that accusation, Marcus said coldly. You have until tomorrow morning to reconsider your position. I suggest you use that time to think carefully about what matters most to you. Your personal comfort zone, or the success of this company and the security of your career. I stood up, my legs shaking slightly. I don't need until tomorrow morning. My answer is no. and it will remain. No. Marcus's smile was sharp as a blade. Then I suppose we have nothing more to discuss. You can see yourself out. I walked out of his office on unsteady legs, my mind reeling from what had just transpired. The open office floor seemed surreal, filled with colleagues going about their normal Tuesday morning routines, while I felt like I had just stepped out of an alternate reality. I made it to my office and closed the door, sinking into my chair and staring at the city skyline without really seeing it. The rest of the day passed in a blur of anxiety and disbelief. I tried to focus on my work, but every email notification made me jump, expecting another summons from Marcus or perhaps a termination notice. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if I had misunderstood something, if there was some innocent explanation for what Marcus had asked me to do. But no matter how I analyzed it, the request remained the same. Use my sexuality to manipulate a competitor for corporate advantage. By 5 o'clock, I was emotionally exhausted. I had accomplished virtually nothing productive, spending most of the day alternating between righteous anger and paralyzing fear about what would happen next. As I packed up my belongings, I noticed several colleagues giving me curious looks. Word traveled fast in open offices, and I wondered if anyone had overheard raised voices from Marcus's office earlier. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Marcus's words, about the 200 employees who depended on the company's success, about my own career that I had worked so hard to build. I thought about my mortgage, my student loans, my retirement savings. I thought about the difficulty of finding another position at my level, especially if Marcus decided to sabotage my references. But mostly, I thought about David Chen and his family. I had met him briefly at industry conferences, and he seemed like a decent man who was passionate about his work and devoted to his family. The idea of manipulating him, of potentially destroying his marriage and hurting his children for corporate gain, made me physically ill. By morning, my resolve had only strengthened. I arrived at the office early, steeling myself for whatever consequences awaited. I didn't have to wait long. At 8:15 a.m., my computer access was revoked. At 8:30, HR Director Patricia Monroe appeared at my office door with a security guard. "Jessica, I need you to come with me," Patricia said, her usual warm demeanor replaced by professional detachment. The walk to the HR office felt like a perp walk. I was acutely aware of every set of eyes that followed my progress, every whispered conversation that stopped as I passed. The security guard, a middle-aged man named Frank, whom I had chatted with countless times in the lobby, avoided making eye contact. Patricia's office was small and windowless, decorated with motivational posters and a single dying plant. She gestured for me to sit while she reviewed a folder thick with documents. "Jessica, I'm afraid we need to discuss your employment status," she began, her voice carefully neutral. "It's come to our attention that you've been insubordinate and have failed to fulfill your job responsibilities." I stared at her in disbelief. "Insubordinate, Patricia. You have no idea what Marcus asked me to do." "I don't need to know the specifics of your assignments," she replied, not meeting my eyes. "What I know is that you refused to complete a task assigned by your supervisor and were disrespectful in your refusal. He asked me to seduce a competitor for corporate intelligence. That's not a job responsibility. That's sexual harassment and potentially illegal." Patricia's expression didn't change. "I'm afraid we have very different accounts of what transpired. According to Marcus, he asked you to attend a networking event and gather competitive intelligence through standard professional channels. Your refusal to do so, combined with your accusatory language, demonstrates a concerning lack of professionalism." I felt like I was in a funhouse mirror, where reality was distorted beyond recognition. "Patricia, you know me. I've worked here for 4 years. I've never been insubordinate or unprofessional. I've exceeded every performance target and received glowing reviews." "Which makes your recent behavior all the more puzzling," she said, finally looking at me directly. "Jessica, I'm going to be frank with you. Marcus has expressed concerns about your commitment to the company and your ability to be a team player. This incident has confirmed those concerns." "What incident?" "Standing up for basic ethical standards." Patricia sighed. I'm not going to debate the merits of your interpretation of events. What I can tell you is that Pinnacle Innovations has decided to terminate your employment, effective immediately. The words hit me like a physical blow. Despite knowing this was a possibility, hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that preparation couldn't soften. You're firing me for refusing to engage in sexual manipulation? We're terminating your employment for insubordination and failure to fulfill job responsibilities. You'll receive 2 weeks severance pay and your unused vacation time. Your health insurance will continue for 30 days. I sat in stunned silence for a moment, processing the surreal nature of the situation. I want to file a complaint. What Marcus asked me to do was illegal and constitutes sexual harassment. Patricia's expression hardened. I would strongly advise against making false accusations against senior management. Such actions could be considered defamatory and might impact your ability to secure future employment. The threat was clear. I realized that Patricia wasn't just delivering Marcus's decision, she was complicit in covering up his behavior. How many other employees had faced similar situations? How many had been silenced by threats to their careers? I need to collect my personal belongings, I said, standing up. Frank will escort you to your office. You'll have 10 minutes to gather personal items only. All company property, including your laptop and any documents, remains here. The next 10 minutes were among the most humiliating of my life. Under Frank's watchful eye, I packed my few personal items into a cardboard box while my colleagues pretended not to stare. My 4 years of work, my professional relationships, my sense of identity as a successful marketing executive, all of it reduced to a small collection of photos, a coffee mug, and a potted plant that was probably going to die without proper care. As I walked through the lobby for the last time, box in hand, I felt like I was in a movie about someone else's life. The gleaming corporate environment that had felt like home just 24 hours earlier now seemed cold and hostile. The security guard held the door open for me, and I stepped out into the Seattle morning, unemployed and uncertain about my future. The first few days after being fired were a blur of practical concerns and emotional processing. I filed for unemployment benefits, updated my resume, and began the demoralizing process of job hunting. But more than that, I grappled with the reality of what had happened to me. I had been fired for refusing to engage in what was essentially corporate-sanctioned sexual manipulation. The injustice of it burned in my chest like acid. I considered my options carefully. I could file a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, but that would be a lengthy process with no guarantee of success. I could consult with an employment attorney, but legal fees would quickly deplete my savings. I could try to move on and find new employment, but the thought of Marcus continuing to abuse his power made me sick. It was during one of my sleepless nights, about a week after being fired, that I remembered something important. During my time at Pinnacle, I had been responsible for managing the company's social media presence and public relations. As part of that role, I had access to analytics and insights about our competitors, including Meridian Solutions. I knew their marketing strategies, their key personnel, and their business practices better than almost anyone else in the industry. But more importantly, I knew something that Marcus didn't think I knew. 6 months earlier, while researching competitive intelligence through legitimate channels, I had discovered that Meridian Solutions was planning a major acquisition. They were quietly negotiating to purchase a smaller software company that would give them a significant advantage in the small business market. The acquisition was scheduled to be announced in their Q4 earnings report, and it would indeed impact Pinnacle's market share substantially. Marcus had been right about one thing. Meridian was planning something significant. What he didn't know was that I already had the information he had asked me to seduce David Chen to obtain. I had gathered it through proper research channels, analyzing public filings, press releases, and industry reports. It was the kind of competitive intelligence that any thorough marketing professional would have in their arsenal. And now, I realized, I had a choice to make. I could use this information to get revenge on Marcus, or I could take the high road and try to move on with my life. The ethical part of me knew that revenge was rarely the answer, that it often caused more harm than good. But the human part of me, the part that had been humiliated and violated, wanted Marcus to face consequences for his actions. I spent days weighing my options, considering the potential ramifications of different courses of action. I researched employment law, corporate ethics, and whistleblower protections. I reached out to former colleagues, trying to gauge whether anyone else had faced similar situations with Marcus. What I discovered was troubling. Through careful conversations and discreet inquiries, I learned that Marcus had a history of inappropriate behavior toward female employees. There had been other requests for special assignments that involved using personal relationships for corporate gain. There had been comments about appearance, suggestions about dress codes, and implications that career advancement was tied to personal favors. The pattern was clear, but most of the women who had experienced it had chosen to leave quietly rather than fight back. The more I learned, the more I realized that my firing wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a systematic pattern of abuse that had been going on for years. Marcus had created a culture where women were expected to use their sexuality as a business tool, and those who refused were pushed out of the company. The fact that he had been able to continue this behavior unchallenged made me angrier than my own personal situation. It was then that I decided to take action, not just for myself, but for all the other women who had been victimized by Marcus's abuse of power. I began documenting everything I could remember about my time at Pinnacle, paying special attention to incidents that might constitute harassment or discrimination. I reached out to former colleagues who had left the company under suspicious circumstances, building a network of potential witnesses. But I also began planning something more immediate and direct. I knew that Marcus was desperate for information about Meridian's Q4 strategy, and I knew that information could be used against him. If I could find a way to expose his unethical behavior while simultaneously undermining his business objectives, I might be able to create real consequences for his actions. The plan I developed was complex and required careful timing. First, I would need to gather more evidence of Marcus's pattern of inappropriate behavior. This meant reaching out to more former employees and documenting their experiences. Second, I would need to find a way to expose Marcus's business practices in a way that would damage his reputation and potentially his company's success. Third, I would need to ensure that the information I possessed about Meridian's acquisition plans was used in a way that would benefit the victims of Marcus's behavior rather than Marcus himself. The first part of my plan involved a systematic campaign of outreach to former Pinnacle employees. I started with women who had left the company during Marcus's tenure, reaching out through LinkedIn and professional networks. I was careful to frame my inquiries as general networking rather than specific investigations. But I found that many women were eager to share their experiences once they realized they weren't alone. The stories I heard were heartbreaking and infuriating. There was Amanda, a former sales director who had been asked to accompany Marcus to client dinners and be charming to potential customers. When she refused to flirt with married clients, her performance reviews suddenly became negative, and she was eventually forced out. There was Kelly, a software developer who had been told that her chances of promotion would improve if she were more social with management. When she filed a complaint with HR, she was labeled as difficult and eventually laid off in a restructuring that seemed to target only women who had complained. The pattern was clear and consistent. Marcus used his position of power to sexualize the workplace and punish women who didn't comply with his expectations. He had created an environment where professional success was tied to personal submission, and those who refused to participate were systematically eliminated. As I documented these experiences, I realized that I had the foundation for a significant whistleblower complaint. The evidence of systematic discrimination and harassment was overwhelming, and I began to understand that my case was much stronger than I had initially realized. But I also knew that taking on a powerful CEO would require more than just documentation. It would require strategic thinking and careful execution. The second part of my plan involved using my knowledge of Meridian's acquisition plans to expose Marcus's unethical business practices. I knew that he was desperate for this information, and that he would likely continue to pressure other employees to obtain it through inappropriate means. If I could find a way to expose his methods while simultaneously ensuring that Pinnacle didn't benefit from the information, I might be able to create real consequences for his behavior. I began by reaching out to David Chen directly. I crafted a carefully worded email that identified me as a former Pinnacle employee and requested a confidential meeting to discuss matters of mutual interest. I was careful not to reveal the specifics of Marcus's request, but I hinted that I had information about unethical competitive practices that he should be aware of. David agreed to meet with me at a neutral location, a coffee shop in downtown Seattle that was far from both of our offices. When I saw him in person, I was reminded of why Marcus's request had been so disturbing. David was clearly a devoted family man, wearing a wedding ring and carrying photos of his children in his wallet. The idea of manipulating him for corporate gain was even more repugnant in person than it had been in theory. I explained to David that I had been fired from Pinnacle for refusing to engage in unethical competitive practices, and that I had reason to believe other employees might be pressured to obtain information about Meridian through inappropriate means. I was careful not to reveal the specific details of Marcus's request, but I provided enough information for David to understand the threat to his company and his personal security. David was shocked by what I told him, but he was also grateful for the warning. He assured me that he would take steps to protect both his company's information and his own personal safety. He also offered to serve as a witness if I decided to pursue legal action against Marcus, recognizing that my situation was part of a larger pattern of abuse. But the most important part of our conversation came when David offered me something unexpected: a job. Meridian Solutions was looking for a senior marketing director, and my experience at Pinnacle, combined with my obvious integrity and courage, made me an ideal candidate. The position would pay more than I had earned at Pinnacle and offered better benefits and growth opportunities. I was stunned by the offer. Here I was, plotting revenge against my former employer, and I was being handed a golden opportunity to move forward with my career. The job at Meridian would not only provide financial security, but also give me a platform to rebuild my professional reputation and continue my career in marketing. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had fired me for refusing to seduce David Chen. And now David Chen was offering me a job that would advance my career beyond anything I could have achieved at Pinnacle. Marcus's unethical behavior had not only failed to achieve his objectives, it had actually benefited his competitor and harmed his own company's interests. I accepted David's offer, but I didn't abandon my plans to expose Marcus's behavior. If anything, having a secure job made me more determined to ensure that he faced consequences for his actions. I now had the financial stability to pursue legal action and the professional credibility to serve as a whistleblower. The third part of my plan involved using my new position at Meridian to ensure that Marcus's unethical behavior became public knowledge. I began by sharing my experiences with industry publications and professional organizations. I wrote articles about workplace harassment and the importance of ethical business practices. I spoke at conferences about the challenges facing women in technology and the need for stronger protections against discrimination. I was careful to focus on the broader issues rather than attacking Marcus personally. But the message was clear. The tech industry had a problem with powerful men who abused their positions, and it was time for that behavior to face consequences. My story resonated with other women in the industry, and I began to receive messages from women who had faced similar situations at other companies. The response was overwhelming. Major publications picked up my story, and I was invited to speak at high-profile conferences about workplace harassment and corporate ethics. My LinkedIn profile was flooded with messages of support from women who had faced similar situations, and I began to realize that my experience was part of a much larger movement toward accountability in the workplace. But the most satisfying part of my revenge wasn't the public attention or the speaking engagements. It was watching Marcus's reaction as his carefully constructed image began to crumble. As more former employees came forward with their stories, Pinnacle's reputation began to suffer. The company's stock price dropped, and several major clients began to reconsider their relationships with the firm. Marcus tried to fight back. Of course, he hired expensive public relations firms to manage the crisis and lawyers to threaten legal action against his accusers. But the evidence against him was overwhelming, and the tide of public opinion had turned decisively against him. The tech industry, which had once celebrated his success, now saw him as a symbol of everything wrong with corporate culture. The final blow came when the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission announced that they were investigating Pinnacle Innovations for systematic discrimination and harassment. The investigation was based on complaints from multiple former employees, and it carried the potential for significant financial penalties and legal consequences. As the investigation progressed, more details about Marcus's behavior became public. The pattern of harassment and discrimination was even more extensive than I had initially realized, affecting dozens of employees over several years. The company's board of directors, faced with mounting legal costs and reputational damage, began to distance themselves from Marcus. 6 months after I was fired, Marcus announced his resignation as CEO of Pinnacle Innovations. The resignation was framed as a voluntary decision to pursue other opportunities, but everyone in the industry knew the truth. He had been forced out by a scandal of his own making, destroyed by the very behavior he had thought made him powerful. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Marcus had fired me for refusing to engage in unethical behavior, and that ethical stance had ultimately led to his downfall. By trying to force me to compromise my principles, he had created the very enemy who would expose his wrongdoing and end his career. But my revenge wasn't just about destroying Marcus, it was about creating positive change for other women in the industry. The publicity around my case led to new policies at many tech companies, stronger protections for whistleblowers, and greater awareness of the need for ethical leadership. My story became a catalyst for broader conversations about power, abuse, and accountability in the workplace. The process wasn't easy, and there were times when I questioned whether the fight was worth the personal cost. Legal battles are expensive and emotionally draining, and there were moments when I wondered if I should have just moved on with my life. But every time I received a message from a woman who had been inspired by my story to speak up about her own experiences, I knew that I had made the right choice. The settlement I eventually reached with Pinnacle Innovations was substantial, though the terms were confidential. More importantly, the company agreed to implement comprehensive changes to its policies and practices, including mandatory training on harassment prevention, stronger protections for employees who report misconduct, and regular third-party audits of workplace culture. Marcus, meanwhile, found that his reputation in the tech industry had been irreparably damaged. Despite his previous successes, no major company was willing to hire him as a CEO. He eventually started a small consulting firm, but his client base was limited, and his influence in the industry had been effectively neutralized. The most satisfying aspect of my revenge was that it had been achieved through entirely legal and ethical means. I had used my knowledge, my professional skills, and my commitment to doing what was right to expose wrongdoing and create positive change. I had proven that it was possible to fight back against powerful abusers without compromising one's own principles. My new position at Meridian Solutions exceeded all my expectations. David Chen proved to be an excellent boss who valued integrity and treated all employees with respect. The company's culture was collaborative and supportive, and I found myself more motivated and productive than I had ever been at Pinnacle. Within a year, I had been promoted to Vice President of Marketing, with a salary that was nearly double what I had earned at my previous job. The acquisition that Marcus had been so desperate to learn about was announced on schedule, and it proved to be even more successful than Meridian had projected. The company's stock price soared, and my stock options made me financially secure for the first time in my life. The information that Marcus had been willing to destroy my career to obtain had ended up benefiting me far more than it ever could have benefited him. But the most rewarding aspect of my new career wasn't the financial success. It was the opportunity to work for a company that aligned with my values. At Meridian, I was able to focus on my work without worrying about inappropriate requests or sexual harassment. I was judged on my performance and my contributions, not on my willingness to compromise my principles. The experience also led me to become more involved in advocacy work around workplace harassment and discrimination. I joined the boards of several organizations that work to protect women in the workplace, and I regularly speak at conferences and events about the importance of ethical leadership and corporate accountability. I've also become a mentor to other women who have faced similar situations. I've learned that my experience, while traumatic, was not unique. Many women in corporate America face pressure to compromise their principles for career advancement, and many are punished when they refuse to do so. By sharing my story and supporting other women who are fighting back, I hope to create a culture where such behavior is no longer tolerated. The legal and professional consequences for Marcus continued to mount long after his resignation. Several civil lawsuits were filed against him by former employees, and while most were settled out of court, the financial cost was significant. His reputation in the business community never recovered, and he was effectively blacklisted from major corporate positions. Pinnacle Innovations, meanwhile, struggled to rebuild its reputation under new leadership. The company's stock price remained depressed for months after the scandal, and several major clients terminated their contracts. The board of directors implemented sweeping changes to the company's culture and policies, but the damage to the brand was lasting. Looking back on the experience 2 years later, I'm proud of the choices I made and the stand I took. Refusing Marcus's inappropriate request was the right thing to do, even though it cost me my job in the short term. The revenge I achieved was sweeter than anything I could have imagined, not because I destroyed an enemy, but because I stood up for what was right and created positive change in the process. The lesson I learned from this experience is that sometimes saying no to powerful people is the most important word you can say. It's not always easy, and it's not always immediately rewarding, but it's essential for maintaining your integrity and creating the kind of world you want to live in. My simple no to Marcus's request didn't just change my life. It changed the lives of countless other women who were inspired to speak up about their own experiences. I've also learned that revenge is most satisfying when it's achieved through positive means. Rather than trying to destroy Marcus through underhanded tactics, I exposed his wrongdoing through legitimate channels and created lasting change in the process. The consequences he faced were the natural result of his own actions, not anything I imposed on him. The tech industry has changed significantly since my experience at Pinnacle. There's greater awareness of harassment and discrimination issues, stronger policies to protect employees, and more accountability for leaders who abuse their power. While there's still work to be done, I'm proud to have played a role in creating those changes. My career has continued to flourish at Meridian Solutions. I've been given opportunities to lead major initiatives and work on projects that align with my values. The company's commitment to ethical business practices has created an environment where I can do my best work while maintaining my integrity. The financial success that came from my stock options and salary increases has given me security and freedom I never had before. But more importantly, it's given me the resources to continue my advocacy work and support other women who are fighting against workplace harassment and discrimination. I still think about Marcus sometimes, and I wonder if he ever reflects on the choices he made and the consequences they brought. I hope he's learned from the experience and that he's found a way to contribute positively to the world. But I also know that the damage he caused was real and lasting, and that the women he harmed deserved better treatment. The story of my firing and subsequent revenge has become something of a legend in the tech industry. It's been written about in business publications, discussed in management courses, and cited as an example of how employees can fight back against corporate abuse. While I never intended to become a symbol of resistance, I'm honored that my experience has inspired others to stand up for their principles. The most important lesson from my experience is that individual actions can create ripple effects that extend far beyond what we can imagine. My decision to say no to Marcus's request seemed like a simple choice at the time, but it ultimately led to systemic changes that benefited countless other women. It reminded me that we all have the power to create positive change, even when we're facing powerful opponents. Today, I'm exactly where I want to be, professionally and personally. I have a job that challenges me and aligns with my values, financial security that gives me freedom and options, and a platform to continue advocating for positive change in the workplace. The revenge I achieved against Marcus was complete and satisfying, but it was just the beginning of a larger journey toward creating a more equitable and ethical business world. The experience taught me that sometimes the greatest victories come not from destroying our enemies, but from refusing to let them destroy us. By maintaining my integrity and fighting back through legitimate means, I was able to achieve justice while creating positive change for others. That's the kind of revenge that lasts, and the kind of victory that makes the struggle worthwhile. My story continues to evolve, and I'm excited about the opportunities ahead. I'm working on a book about workplace harassment and corporate accountability, and I'm launching a nonprofit organization to support women who are fighting back against discrimination. The simple no that started this journey has become a platform for creating lasting change, and I'm grateful for every opportunity to use my experience to help others. In the end, the best revenge wasn't just personal satisfaction or professional success. It was the knowledge that my refusal to compromise my principles had created a ripple effect that would protect other women from experiencing what I had endured. Every policy change, every new protection for employees, every conversation about workplace ethics that resulted from my case represented a small victory against the culture of abuse that Marcus had perpetuated. The tech industry still has problems with harassment and discrimination, but there's greater awareness now of these issues and stronger mechanisms for addressing them. Companies are more careful about their hiring practices, more responsive to complaints, and more committed to creating inclusive environments. The old boys club mentality that allowed men like Marcus to abuse their power is slowly being dismantled, replaced by a culture that values integrity and respect. My experience also changed how I approach my own leadership responsibilities. As I've advanced in my career, I've made it a priority to create safe spaces for the women who work for me. I've implemented open-door policies, established mentorship programs, and made it clear that inappropriate behavior will not be tolerated. I've tried to be the kind of leader I wished I had during my time at Pinnacle. The personal cost of fighting back was significant. There were sleepless nights, anxiety attacks, and moments when I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. The legal battles were expensive and emotionally draining, and there were times when I wondered if I should have just accepted Marcus's behavior and moved on with my life. But every time I felt like giving up, I reminded myself of all the other women who had suffered in silence and deserved to have their voices heard. The support I received from other women in the industry was overwhelming and humbling. I received hundreds of messages from women who had faced similar situations, thanking me for speaking out and encouraging me to continue fighting. Many of them shared their own stories of harassment and discrimination, and I realized that my experience was just one part of a much larger pattern of abuse that had been hidden for too long. The media attention that followed my case was both empowering and overwhelming. I was invited to speak at conferences, interviewed by major publications, and featured in documentaries about workplace harassment. While I appreciated the platform to share my message, I also struggled with the loss of privacy and the constant scrutiny that came with being a public figure. But the most rewarding aspect of the entire experience was the opportunity to create real change. The policies that were implemented at Pinnacle and other companies as a result of my case have protected countless women from harassment and discrimination. The conversations that my story sparked have led to greater awareness of these issues and stronger commitment to addressing them. The nonprofit organization I founded has helped dozens of women navigate their own battles against workplace abuse. Marcus's downfall was swift and complete. Within a year of his resignation, he had disappeared from the tech industry entirely. His consulting firm failed to attract clients, and his reputation made it impossible for him to secure another executive position. The man who had once been celebrated as a visionary leader became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and toxic leadership. I occasionally wondered what became of him, but I didn't dwell on his fate. My focus was on the future, on building a career that aligned with my values and creating opportunities for other women to succeed. The revenge I had achieved was complete, but it was just the beginning of a larger mission to create positive change in the workplace. The financial settlement I received from Pinnacle allowed me to take risks and pursue opportunities that I might not have otherwise considered. I invested in startups led by women entrepreneurs, donated to organizations fighting workplace harassment, and funded scholarships for women pursuing careers in technology. The money that was meant to compensate me for the harm I had suffered became a tool for creating positive change. My relationship with David Chen and the team at Meridian Solutions continued to flourish. The company's culture of respect and integrity made it a place where I could thrive professionally while maintaining my personal values. The acquisition that Marcus had been so desperate to learn about proved to be a tremendous success, and my contributions to the company's growth were recognized with promotions and increased responsibilities. 3 years after being fired from Pinnacle, I was named one of the most influential women in technology by a major industry publication. The recognition was gratifying, but it also came with a responsibility to continue advocating for change. I used the platform to speak out about workplace harassment, mentor other women, and push for stronger protections for employees. The book I wrote about my experience became a bestseller and sparked conversations about workplace ethics across industries. I donated the proceeds to organizations fighting harassment and discrimination, turning my personal trauma into a resource for helping others. The speaking engagements and consulting opportunities that followed allowed me to share my message with even broader audiences. Looking back on the entire experience, I'm amazed by how much my life changed as a result of one simple word: no. That refusal to compromise my principles set in motion a chain of events that transformed not just my own career, but the entire culture of the tech industry. It proved that individual actions can have far-reaching consequences and that standing up for what's right is always worth the cost. The revenge I achieved against Marcus was more complete than I could have imagined. He lost his career, his reputation, and his influence in the industry. But more importantly, his downfall served as a warning to other powerful men who might be tempted to abuse their positions. The message was clear. The days of unchecked harassment and discrimination were ending, and there would be consequences for those who refused to change. My story has become a case study in business schools and corporate training programs, used to illustrate the importance of ethical leadership and the dangers of toxic workplace culture. While I never intended to become a symbol of resistance, I'm proud that my experience has educated future leaders about the need for integrity and respect in the workplace. The nonprofit organization I founded has grown beyond my wildest expectations. We've helped hundreds of women navigate workplace harassment, provided legal support for those fighting discrimination, and advocated for policy changes that protect employees. The work is challenging and often heartbreaking, but it's also incredibly rewarding to see the positive impact we're having on women's lives. The tech industry continues to evolve, with new challenges and opportunities emerging regularly. But the fundamental changes that resulted from cases like mine have created a foundation for more equitable and respectful workplaces. While there's still work to be done, I'm optimistic about the future and proud of the role I played in creating positive change. My personal life has also been transformed by the experience. The confidence I gained from fighting back against Marcus has carried over into every aspect of my life. I've learned to trust my instincts, stand up for my values, and refuse to accept treatment that doesn't align with my worth. The experience taught me that I'm stronger than I ever imagined and capable of overcoming even the most challenging obstacles. The relationships I've built through my advocacy work have been among the most meaningful of my life. I've connected with women from all over the world who have faced similar challenges, and together we've created a network of support and solidarity. These relationships have enriched my life in ways that go far beyond professional success. As I look toward the future, I'm excited about the opportunities ahead. I'm working on a second book about leadership and ethics, expanding my nonprofit organization, and considering new career challenges. The simple no that started this journey has opened doors I never could have imagined and created opportunities that align perfectly with my values and goals. The revenge I achieved against Marcus was complete, but it was never just about him. It was about creating a world where women can succeed professionally without having to compromise their integrity or endure harassment. It was about proving that ethical behavior is not just morally right, but also strategically smart. It was about showing that individual actions can create lasting change and that standing up for what's right is always worth the cost. My story continues to inspire women around the world to speak up about their own experiences and fight back against workplace abuse. Every woman who refuses to accept inappropriate behavior, every employee who reports harassment, every leader who creates a respectful workplace culture is continuing the work that began with my simple no to Marcus's outrageous request. The best revenge, I've learned, isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about refusing to let them destroy you and using your experience to create positive change for others. It's about turning trauma into triumph and using your voice to amplify the voices of those who might otherwise go unheard. It's about proving that integrity and courage are more powerful than wealth and position. Today, I'm exactly where I want to be, doing work that matters and making a difference in the world. The path that led me here was difficult and sometimes painful, but it was also transformative and ultimately rewarding. I wouldn't change anything about my experience because it taught me who I am and what I'm capable of achieving. The simple word no that I spoke to Marcus in his office that day was the beginning of everything that followed. It was the moment I chose integrity over comfort, principle over profit, and courage over compliance. It was the moment I discovered that I had the power to create change, even when facing seemingly insurmountable obstacles. That's the message I share with every woman who hears my story. You have more power than you realize, and your voice matters more than you know. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is say no to those who would abuse their power, even when it's scary and uncertain. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let others define your worth or dictate your choices. My journey from a fired marketing director to a respected leader and advocate proves that setbacks can become comebacks, and that the worst experiences can lead to the greatest triumphs. The revenge I achieved was sweet, but the positive change I created was even sweeter. And that's a victory that will last long after the personal satisfaction of defeating Marcus has faded. The story of my firing and subsequent revenge has become a testament to the power of individual courage and the importance of standing up for what's right. It's a reminder that we all have the ability to create positive change, even when we're facing powerful opponents. And it's proof that sometimes the most important word you can say is no, even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted. In the end, my simple no changed everything. And I'm grateful for every consequence that followed.